All right. So our agenda today, so Marcos is going to be presenting, and then we'll go through our regular housekeeping agenda. So we have a special guest today, Dr. Samir Rux, Rux Mohan, we can call him Dr. Rux. So he's currently a neurocritical care fellow at UT Southwestern in Dallas, Texas, and he completed his residency at Larkin Community Hospital. He'll be available to answer any questions that you guys may have throughout the presentation and towards the end as well. Thanks for being here again, Dr. Rux.
Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks. And now I'm going to hand it over to Marcos.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marcos Flores. I'm a fourth-year medical student from UMHS. Feel free to ask any questions throughout or interrupt me if you want to discuss something or anything else. I'm very interested in neurology, and my paper name is Effects of Aerobic Exercise Training on Systemic Biomarkers and Cognition in Late Middle Age Adults at Risk for Alzheimer's Disease. I'm going to explain everything. Don't worry. You can. Okay. So this paper consists on 25 patients. They were enrolled. 2 were excluded. So at the end, there were 23 asymptomatic patients, late middle age adults with family or genetic risk for Alzheimer's disease. The whole thing was for 26 weeks. There were 2 groups, one in training and the other one with less physical activity. And we analyzed different biomarkers like the BDNF, myokine, CTSV, Clodo, lipid panel, metabolics, which are 181 metabolites. So I'm gonna do a quick recap on Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's is one of the most common neurodegenerative disease. It consists of accumulation of amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles. Sorry for it. I stumble in that word. Results in a progressive loss of brain function that eventually leads to mental and physical disability. We know there's a relationship with ApoE4, which people with this gene, they are increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. And some people of this paper, they had this ApoE or they had Alzheimer's disease in their family. We don't know how is the mechanism like exactly, but we think it's because this gene, this protein carry cholesterol, and there's some problems there carrying that cholesterol, and recent studies suggest that problems with brain cells ability to process fats or lipids may play a key role in Alzheimer's and related diseases. Why this is very important, this investigation, because we are lacking of pharmacological options for Alzheimer's disease, and if lifestyles can do it, why don't study it? So we have had previous studies with rodents, and we have seen that running enhanced hippocampal neurogenesis, synaptic plasticity, and neurotrophin levels through the lifetime. Also, with aging humans, we have seen gray and white matter volume changes because when they are exposed to aerobic exercise, we have seen an increase in gray and white matter volume because of enhanced blood flow in the brain and improved memory functions. But the problem with all this studies are the expensive brain imaging, and it's not practical for large population studies. So this study that it's like we are having the levels of the blood, it's more cost effective, and it's good if we can find a relationship or a correlation that we can see it there in the blood. That's why this is very important. Okay. So what are myokines? There has been studies that suggest that the muscles, the skeletal muscles, are like an endocrine organ, because we have seen that when we do exercise, they contract and they secrete these hormones or these peptides that are expressed and released by the muscle fibers, and it affects beneficially in different organs. So we have seen that hypertrophy increase these productions, and atrophy will decrease it. The first biomarker that we study here is the BDNF, which is the brain derivative neurotrophic factor. There's an apparent upregulation in rodent hippocampus and cortex by running. It is important in neurogenesis, synaptic plasticity, memory functions, and play an important role in neurological survival growth. Sorry. This protein does everything by tyrokines B, which activates the whole process that we have studied before. So an increase in BDNF, we have seen an increase in BDNF, lower cognition impairment. So that's what we want. The second myokine is the CTSB, which we have seen a relationship with cognitive impairment, because if CTSB increase, we have seen beta amyloid decrease, so neurocognitive impairment will decrease. And there's an association between the increase of CTSB and the exercise. The other one is CLOTO, which is which there's a relationship with cognition and synaptic function. And there is an association with this protein and resilience to neurodegenerative disease. What that means is that it's like neuroprotective. So if we have an increase in this protein, we will be protected against the neurodegenerative disease. And again, increased CLOTO, decreased cognitive impairment. So here we have a imaging of what I have said, that the sedentary life, obesity, and aging, they all increase atrophy. So it will inhibit this myokines production, and physical activity will increase myokines production and will affect positively to the brain. So the hypothesis of this study is that we will see an increase in BDNF, CTSB, and CLOTO with exercise training, and it will correlate with cognition and metabolic markers of the brain health. So the demographic of this study are people from Wisconsin. They were chosen from Wisconsin registries. There were 25 middle-aged adults with family history and the ApoE4 association. They had to be physical inactive, which is defined by less than 150 minutes weekly of physical activity. People had to be from 45-year-old to 80-year-old. They need to be cognitively healthy, and it was randomized selective between the UPA, which is the usual physical activity group, and the enhanced physical activity group.
Hey, Marcos, I have a question. How did they measure whether the person was cognitively healthy or not?
Yes, we're gonna go a little
Right,
bit
okay.
more in some slides. I'm gonna explain that. So the two groups that we had was the UPA, which is the usual activity group, physical activity group, sorry. And this was, they only gave this group of people an educational material and how to do a more healthy, or how to be more healthy, or how to be active. But we know that material information don't make a lot of people change, so they expect that this group will maintain their usual level of physical activity, which they measure also. And the other group is the enhanced physical activity, which consists on a supervised, progressive, and moderate, vigorous intensity aerobic exercise, and they needed to do at least 3 times per week. So for the physical activity, we measured the cardiorespiratory fitness assessment, which it was, they were doing treadmill and they were doing the inclines and they were measuring the oxygen in the venous and the heart rate and how they were exhaling, inhaling, and what all those parameters. Also, we had the free living physical activity assessment. And this was a recurring device that they had to wear a minimum of 3 times weekly and one day in the weekend. And it had to be for 10 hours, like I said. And they calculated time spent sedentary, spent in light, moderate, or vigorous physical activity for both groups. And now, to answer the question that Sam asked me, the cognitive function tests they did 4 different tests to assess different things. So the mini mental state examination was to assess global cognition function, the California verbal learning for episodic verbal memory, the Delis-Kaplan executive function for executive function, and the color word interference also. They took blood examples for this group of people before and after. And before and after, they did the same things. They took 10 millimeters, 12 hours, they had to be fasting. They had to be fasting from food, caffeine, and alcohol. And they also analyzed the lipids and the biomarkers there. We're gonna see an image now. And in the image, it's everything that I have explained. Baseline, it's what we took fasting at the beginning. Then it was divided in 2 groups, EPA and the UPA, which it was 11 people in EPA. In UPA, it was 12. And at the end of the weeks, we had the post-intervention that we analyzed the same thing as the baseline. And in the bottom, we can see in the plasma what we measure, serum and the Clotho lipid panel and everything else up there. So the results was that the population was a 50% female, 35% had at least 1 copy of ApoE4, and the mini mental exam was they had a mean of 29.61, which, to remind you guys, that the probably normal or what we are expecting in a person that takes the mini mental exam is a 25 to 30 to say that it can be normal. From less than there, we're starting to think in impairment. So again, the results, we have here the mean of the age, both of the groups. It was 63 in UPA, 65 in EPA. The females, as I say, was almost half of the population. Sorry. Education the mean was 16 years of education. They had history of Alzheimer's disease, and also some people had the association with the gene. So the biomarkers, what happened with the biomarkers when they measure it. So in the UPA group, as we expected, there was no changes at all or significant changes. But in the EPA group, they saw some things that they were not expected. Like, it was expected that the CTSV will change. It was an increase in CTSV, but in the BDNF, it was reduced, and Clotho levels was unchanged. But we saw a positively correlation with cardiorespiratory function. So here is the image. We can see in the first graph on the left, we see the CTSV, UPA and EPA group. We'll see an increase in EPA more significantly than UPA. BDNF, we will see a decrease in BDNF. And in Clotho, which is the right one, we will see like no changes at all. So, in the absence of therapeutics for Alzheimer's disease, as I said, the exercise has become an important lifestyle factor that may prevent or delay onset of this disease. Systemic biomarkers and metabolites were generally consistent. The CTSV, as I said, there was a positively correlation with cognition and modulation of lipid metabolites, verbal learning, and memory, and a measure by CBLT, which was one of the cognitive function tests. So plasma in the CTSV, as I said, it was elevated, and the BDNF was diminished. Also, here with the CBLT, we have seen this is a neurocognitive function. There was a relationship with the CTSV. So if there's a correlation, we can measure CTSV, and we can, if this is a relationship like very good, we can predict the Alzheimer's disease or the changes that we are having associated with predictions with Alzheimer's disease without the cost of doing neuroimaging. So may be useful as a cognitive change. We can measure this. That's what this investigation wants. The lack of correlation among clotho and cognitive outcomes in the present of study was surprising, because there has been studies that shown a change in clotho, like increase and decrease neurocognitive function. But as I said, it was very associated with cardiorespiratory fitness. Also, they saw doing the multiple lipid panel metabolites a decrease with ceramides and different sphingomyelins and different lipids that are neuroprotective. So if these lipids are increased, we are associated with Alzheimer's disease, but if they decrease, they're neuroprotective. And that decrease what we saw in the exercise people, that they were exercising. So the limitations of this investigation was the specific population. They were only from Wisconsin. They measure only pre and post. They didn't measure during, so we don't know how it did it change, or when did it suddenly change. If it was 2 weeks, 3 weeks, how many weeks? Also, they didn't document the diet. We don't know which type of diet, or if they changed the diet, and that wasn't meaningful for how these levels changed. Also, there have seen some studies that have shown resistant exercise, but we only measure here aerobic exercises. Also, this this investigation measured both female and males. Like they didn't do it separately. They do it combined. But there have been studies that show some physiological differences in the muscles and how the myokines are produced in male and female.
Sorry, can anybody else think of any other limitations for this study? Unless you have more slides on it, Marcos.
No. I finished. This was the last slide for the investigation. I'm gonna add some information now, but if you have any questions, just let me know. We can discuss.
I have a quick question. So this is a 26-week long intervention, and they measured the cognitive performance before and after. So was there a truly significant difference in these populations before and after in terms of their cognition?
Yes, in terms of the cognition, they measured we can go back to the cognition test. Okay, go forward. One more. There. they saw a relationship between the CVLT, which is the episodic verbal memory, and it was that one, and the biomarker BDNF. So in the group that they were exercising, it increased. So they were better at this cognition function test, and we could correlate that, like being better, or the score of this test, with the increase in those metabolites.
All right, thank you. I was just surprised that there was a difference that was measurable in just 26 weeks in terms of
Yes.
cognition. It seems such a short period of time for something like Alzheimer's, which takes a long time.
No,
Yeah,
I think,
when I saw, yeah, go ahead, Doc.
yeah, so no, I mean, he brings up a good question also about that. Was it a significant difference or just a correlation between your UPA and your EPA groups?
Between the neurocognitive or the levels of the myokines?
UPA, you see the p-value is not less than 0.05, so it's not significant. It's just a correlation. It's not a significant.
Yeah.
Okay. At least the EPA, they had one value on the BDNF that was significant in their role or in their eyes.
Yes, and they only said that the EPA group, the CTSV, it was increased. So yeah, but I definitely agree that it will be better if we do it a longer period, and that's I'm gonna talk about, it's not Alzheimer's disease, but it's mortality, and we can the other investigation, it's like 8 years, so definitely we're gonna see a difference there. Also, it says here, this population, they were physical inactive, but I don't know if they had previously history of being athletes or something, that I don't know if that changed.
Right, and I know they said they assessed cognitively intact, right? But they're using CVO2, they're using other markers, right? What happens if some of these patients have, right, cardiac issues, respiratory issues, but you're not monitoring, right? You're just saying cognition intact baseline, right? Pre and post, and to show that correlation of improvement.
They don't, yes, I agree. They don't measure any comorbidities. They don't say anything else about any other diseases.
And then also, right.
Go ahead. Sorry, I just had another question, which I think, Marcos, you kind of answered it, but like when they were separating the groups, they did not like test their like cardiovascular function previously, right? So they did not like separate for like who was already cardiovascularly healthier, or like who had any like sort of like regular exercising before they started the study versus after, correct?
No, correct. They divided first the group, and then they assessed the cardiorespiratory fitness, but it was just that they didn't measure against how their heart was working or anything. It was just how it was, the baseline of them, and then the changes, and that's it.
Okay, so they couldn't like have any results or conclusions on whether like long-term cardiovascular exercise versus like the short-term 26 weeks, if there's like a significant difference, or like anything like that.
The only thing that they measure there was a correlation with the physical activity or the cardiorespiratory fitness. It was with the Cloto. That's what the only thing they said, that with Cloto the marker and the cardiorespiratory, they saw a correlation. There was an increase with people that had a better cardiorespiratory fitness assessments, but they didn't say anything about how that was a predictive value or anything.
Okay, and there was thank you.
If that answers the questions.
Yeah.
There was a mention of like the ApoE4. Go back to one of your slides. It said 35% of the patients in it had or did they account for that? Having these biomarkers showing a correlation or improvement, but at least we know the, significant correlation between having the ApoE4 and having Alzheimer's. So what is that? Did they account for that in looking for this?
The only thing they did, and go one slide more, it was that they had, I didn't see like a specific, but what I could interpret what they said, it was that they divided these people like randomly, and we have ApoE positively like in both groups. We have in UPA and IPA, so they measured them like a whole, but they didn't exclude them or took them in consideration of the changes with the ApoE. They had all the history and they just randomized, divided, but no. But that's a good question.
Yeah.
Because that is a very high risk factor.
I also had one more
Any other
question.
Yeah.
For these biomarkers that they're using, like the BDNF, Klotho, CTSB, did they comment on if there's any difference in these levels between, because all these these participants, sorry, they are at risk from their history. I want to know if they commented on if there's any differences between not like people without those risk factors compared to this study group, to see if there is like a baseline difference in these biomarkers.
I'm sorry, I didn't got your question very.
So my question is there a difference in the biomarkers from people from the regular population compared to these ones in the study where they are at risk for Alzheimer's?
Okay.
Comment on if there is any difference?
No, they didn't say anything about how the biomarkers were with the regular population and this population. They just, so like the control for them was people that were not doing any exercises, and they did it against the people that were doing exercise, and that was it.
So I think that's one of the flaws of this study, right? If they're not able to compare, right, the ApoE4 patients versus the baseline patients, we don't have a cardiovascular respiratory function baseline. All we had was a mini mental status exam. The other thing was those testing, right, for cognitively intact patients. What happens if they're patients like us, right, that are actually intelligent people that, can pass an, I don't know if you guys have ever done an MMSE, but like it's very us, right? That's why they test for people like us, a MoCA, Montreal Cognitive Assessment, to be able to assess function, because the MMSEs are really just for older, demented patients.
Yeah. And if you are exposed to the mini mental exam a lot, it's easier.
Yeah.
Now, the only thing we have for education was the mean was 16 years of education. But they didn't mention if it was that they were taking in consider like high school, elementary school, and everything, or it was post like college or anything. No. They said just 16 years.
I think despite like all the limitations of this study, it's still like a good kind of study to be presented, just to kind of show the potential of these biomarkers, potential physical activity in the treatment of Alzheimer's, and kind of will just like open the door to see like what sort of studies they should do in the future, and like where there's gaps. Like this is kind of like showing us where there's gaps and like where those gaps can potentially be filled,
Definitely agree.
Yeah, because
go ahead, Mark.
This was one of the trials that I could like find, because a lot of them was review. They were doing like review and review and review. It wasn't that good because they didn't like measure, or they didn't do it by themselves, like physical activity, and like measure it actually in the actual investigation.
Do you know if there are any like longer term studies like underway?
I don't know if they are doing. I know that it's a very hot topic right now, There's been a lot of investigation in it, and the other additional information, I'm gonna talk about a mortality study and exercise. They compare mortality against exercise. So, but I don't know if neurodegenerative diseases with like actual physical activity. Does anyone, Doctor, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think also, right, biomarkers is an interesting kind of, research standpoint, not only for cognition, but also for stroke, right? A lot of the research now is being pumped into looking at like von Willebrand factor, VCAM, different like proteins, metalloproteinases to be able to predict stroke inevitably. So that's something that is an interesting part that we should start looking at and researching. I'm glad, obviously the study was limited. They needed a bigger population size, more significant value. I mean, I think it's a step in the right direction of what we need to start looking for to be able to predict, right, in our elderly population, right, and to anticipate this in stroke as well.
And for a longer period, because 26 weeks, we can see differences, but we're not gonna see like huge changes.
Right.
Does anyone has any questions or anything else? So additional information, this was a podcast that I like to hear too. It's the Psychiatry and Physical Therapy by Dr. David Potter. And this episode, the 165, it's very interesting because there's a panel of different doctors and they are discussing this, a lot of the a few investigations like papers, and they were discussing and how they implement those changes like in the actual patients that they had in office, like the treatment. And they talk of different things like how the pathophysiology between how exercise is related to dementia is multifactorial. They also link between the low skeletal mass and cognition. So low skeletal mass, like I said, decrease the protein synthesis, and there's the equal of less neuronal connection. Sorry. Also, we have seen systemic inflammation and cognition declines. If we have a lot of inflammation, there's a lot of proteins, bad proteins that aggregates, and there's cognition decline. Because also they say that increase the blood-brain barrier permeability, and that affects the cognition. Also, the Dr. Potter in the podcast, he was saying that as you get older, you get more atrophy, and you feel bad with yourself because you are not able to do things that you don't feel stronger. You feel weak. So he took one of his like 80-old female, a patient of him that was depressed, and he started with her doing exercise. So she was able to deadlift a little amount of weights, but after that, she felt better. She was more clear, and he was like, it's so easy to do exercise, but we think first in like pharmacological options and not exercise. He said like, why we don't push exercise more.
Also, a confounder there could be like pseudo dementia, especially when considering exercise, because like it's been shown that like exercise decreases like depression, right? Just because of the endorphins and stuff that are released during exercise. But yeah, that's still like a good, interesting study they talked about.
Yeah. So this study in 2018, I just want to go briefly. It was very meaningful for me because it was for a period of 8 years, and they measured people with low performance below average, above average, high, and elite, like doing exercise. And they compare exercise with mortality. We're not talking about neurocognitive function, we're talking about mortality as a whole. And they level the mortality with the cardiorespiratory fitness. And they found that as fitness increased, risk of all cause of mortality decreased without limit. And that was very interesting for me. Go ahead to see the graphic. So we can see here how mortality, how performance group and adjust hazard ratio. So at a higher value in hazard ratio means that if you do that, you have a higher risk of dying in this case. So we can see how it lowers when we measure the groups of low exercise, below average, above average, high, and elite. When they are in elite, they decrease like very drastically. And go ahead, the next one. This was a table that impacted me the most because we have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 comorbidities category, and we can see the hazard ratio. So if they stop smoking, it was like smoking versus non-smoking. So the hazard ratio was 1.41. If they like stop smoking, or if they were smoking, they had a 1.41 higher risk of dying by smoking alone. And also CAD, diabetes, hypertension, and end-stage renal disease. But when we see the group comparison, they took all those comorbidities and they like adjust the measurements for take them in consideration. And they just measure low versus elite exercise. And they saw that people with low physical activity had a like 5.04 hazard ratio of dying against elite. So I know we're not gonna be elite like a lot of people, but if we see low versus above average, is still 2.75, which is almost the same thing as having end-stage renal disease and not having it, of dying of it. And also it's more than, I don't want to say like quick smoking, but it's also better, like doing exercise. You will see like doing exercise will decrease your mortality more than if you quit smoking. Yeah, but that's like an assumption. And that part was one of the things that impacted me the most, because we also, for somehow we say like quick smoking, we need to quit smoking, but quick smoking, quick doing this, quick doing that, but what about the exercise? So yeah, that was the thing that I want to say. So exercise can help you in mortality and also neurocognitive. That's what we want to know. I want to investigate more about it. So if you have any questions, any doubts, let me know. Any questions? Go ahead. Any comments?
Yeah, great presentation. No, thank you for the information. Well informed. Obviously, there's a lot of field that we need to continue working on, and I'm sure we can all learning more from it. So great job.
Yes, great job, Marcos. And we had a great discussion today. Thanks for everyone who asked questions, and thank you to Dr. Rux again for being here. And everyone for participating. So if nothing else, then Dr. Rux, it's nice having you. And we will keep continuing to work with you on any other projects you have for us.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, if anyone's interested in neurology or doing any neurocritical care research, we got a lot. So just reach out.
I am, doctor. I am.
Awesome. Okay. We'll get you involved.
Do you mind if I share your email with the group? And
yeah, absolutely.
Perfect, sounds good. All right. For everyone else, we'll continue with the rest of our meeting. Dr. Rux, it was nice having you. Thank you again. I'm gonna just end the recording.
Good. Bye, guys.
Bye, thanks.
Bye, doctor. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.